All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and get started. Before we jump on, just for everyone who's just joined, wanted to say thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon to join us. We have a really great lineup of folks speaking. After everyone speaks, we will open up the floor to Q&A. When we do that, please put any questions you have in the chat with your name and outlet, and we'll call on you in the order we receive them. With that, I would like to turn over the floor to Andrea Miller, President of NIRH.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. I'm Andrea Miller, the president of the National Institute for Reproductive Health and the NIRH Action Fund. We are a national advocacy organization that's dedicated to advancing just and equitable access to reproductive health care, including abortion. And we do that through deep, lasting partnerships with advocates, healthcare providers, and elected officials working at the state and local level, leveraging strategy and resources, both financial and technical, to help make positive change happen in about half the states each year. Which is why I'm so excited to be here with you today, because over the last week, we have seen election results come rolling in. And by now, hopefully, I don't have to convince you that abortion is a winning issue. Last Tuesday, abortion was literally on the ballot in 5 states, the most ever in a single year. And figuratively, it was on the ballot in scores of state races, especially for governors and in state legislatures. And I want to acknowledge there were, of course, plenty of sobering results that remind us we have many fights ahead. But these clear wins are both significant in their own right and very telling about the future. To put a finer point on it, at the state level, as a recap, in each state, a ballot measure was put forth pertaining to abortion. Voters chose to enshrine rights in their state constitutions, like in California and Michigan and Vermont, or refuse to further embolden the efforts to eviscerate abortion access, like in Kentucky and Montana. In states with tight contests for governors, voters overwhelmingly chose the candidate who has demonstrated time and again their commitment to standing up for reproductive freedom. That includes in Arizona and Michigan, Maryland and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, New York, Oregon, and more. State legislative chambers flipped in Michigan, both of them. One did so in Minnesota, and that gives both of those important upper Midwestern states that are access points for abortion care their trifectas that support that back, finally. And Pennsylvania flipped one chamber as well. All of this reveals the tides are turning, because across the board, voters made clear where they stand. Full stop. It's on the side of access to abortion care. But I want to be really clear. This was not about a single issue. Rather, it was voters casting their ballot for our fundamental freedoms, our futures, our ability to take care of our loved ones and build the communities that can make us all safe and healthy. What's more, voters recognized exactly where and how they can affect this change at the state level, where elected leaders can and should use every lever of power available to them to protect and expand access to reproductive health care. So as you take stock of what's happened and what it portends for the future, I encourage you to resist the urge to view this as a unique one-off midterm election story, and instead see it for what it is, part of an upward trajectory of a powerful movement created by the combined efforts of advocates and abortion providers and elected officials who have been building support and moving the ball forward, often under the radar, not just for months leading to this election, but for years. Because these victories didn't come from nowhere. Advocates have been organizing and fighting on these fronts for forever. And with every clinic buffer zone passed, like in Louisville, Kentucky, every policy to shield patients and abortion providers from unjust prosecutions, like in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and every abortion fund created, like in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and San Francisco, California, and every regulation designed to protect people from the harms of so-called crisis pregnancy centers, like in Los Angeles, and every right to reproductive freedom enshrined, like in the 17 states that had already done so prior to the Dobbs decision. These are the things that have paved the way to these incredible midterm wins. And that is why I am so honored to be here today, joined by National Institute for Reproductive Health partners who have been so integral to creating this powerful movement and making change in states and cities across the country. You're going to hear from our partners today, including Julie Zaebst, the Senior Policy Advocate at the ACLU of Pennsylvania, Daniel Hamilton, Director of Public Policy at YWCA Kalamazoo, Xochitl Lopez-Ayala, Policy Advocacy Coordinator at Access Reproductive Justice, and Erin E.H. Smith, the Executive Director at Kentucky Health Justice Network. Before I turn it over to these incredible partners, I just want to set the stage for how else we know there's such incredible momentum behind this movement. There's rightly been a lot of attention paid to the Dobbs decision and the resulting rush to ban abortion in roughly 15 states or so. But what Dobbs also unleashed is an unprecedented forward momentum at the state and local level, despite that historic setback at the Supreme Court. Later this month, the National Institute for Reproductive Health will be releasing a report that looks at just the first 3 months post-Dobbs, not even including the elections, which we're talking about today. And I'm going to preview here that a record number of states and localities took action to protect and expand access to abortion. We've been tracking and engaging at the state and local level for more than a decade, and we've never seen anything like it in a short 3 months. From allocating funding to abortion care, to passing laws to protect providers and clinic staff, to expanding access through insurance plans, to protecting digital healthcare information, and creating stricter regulations of crisis pregnancy centers, they've been doing it all. So here's my quick spoiler alert for what you can watch for with 2 data points. In 14 states, governors and attorney generals issued executive and other orders to protect abortion access in those 3 months following Dobbs. That's akin to the number that acted to protect access in the early days of COVID. And a record 13 localities in red, purple, and blue states have funded abortion care and or the practical support services like travel, lodging, and childcare. Again, in just those 3 months. And let me just let you know, as a context, it took 3 years for us to get 2 cities to do it prior to Dobbs. All of that momentum is thanks to the kind of the work that we are so proud to participate in side by side with our partners. And it's because, like the voters, state and local elected officials and advocates see the post-Dobbs landscape for the public health crisis that it is and are responding accordingly. So I'm very, very proud and honored and privileged to be able to turn this over now to our partners. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Julie Zaebst, the Senior Policy Advocate at the ACLU of Pennsylvania. Julie, take it away.
Hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with you today and to talk about the work that we've been doing and are going to continue to do to protect and expand abortion access across Pennsylvania. Unlike the other states represented on the call today, abortion wasn't on the ballot in Pennsylvania in terms of a ballot question last Tuesday, but it was very much on the ballot in terms of candidates' positions on the issues. There were stark differences on the issue of abortion access between our gubernatorial candidates, between our U.S. Senate candidates, and frequently between candidates in down ballot races too. Pennsylvania elected a U.S. Senator who will stand strong for abortion access and a governor who's been a champion for abortion rights since the start of his political career. We are still waiting for results in a couple of Pennsylvania House races, but it is possible that Democrats will take the state House for the first time in more than a decade. And this was totally unexpected. And it's critically important because it means that the anti-abortion state constitutional amendment the legislature moved this past July would be stopped dead in its tracks. To pick up on one of the themes that Andrea was sharing, these victories for abortion rights were not seeded overnight. The work didn't begin when Roe fell in June. This is really a culmination of years of work within our movement in Pennsylvania. We've been fighting for abortion access since the 1980s, when the Pennsylvania legislature enacted a slew of devastating restrictions on abortion care here. And we doubled down on this work again in the 2010s as state legislatures across the country, including in Pennsylvania, began pushing even harder on abortion bans and restrictions. And even folks who aren't deeply involved in this political work know what these barriers look like because we see them in real life, right? Pennsylvanians know what it's like to seek abortion care when you can't use your health insurance to cover the cost and you spend weeks hustling to come up with the funds. We know what it's like to be forced to listen to biased state-scripted counseling and then wait 24 hours after that to get the health care we need. Pennsylvanians know what it's like to get a devastating fetal diagnosis at a 20-week scan and then scramble to talk to specialists and make a decision about whether to continue the pregnancy because our state bans abortion after 24 weeks gestation. The other unique thing about Pennsylvania is where we're situated geographically. I think if Pennsylvanians had any doubt about what a near total ban on abortion would look like, we got a firsthand look at the horrific consequences this summer. Ohio had a 6-week ban that was in effect, and then West Virginia's near total ban took effect this fall. So people were panicking and coming to Pennsylvania for care. But the reality is that we only have 2 clinics west of Harrisburg, in other words, in the western 2/3 of our state. And so those clinics were overwhelmed and wait time stretched to upwards of 4 weeks. Folks from Western Pennsylvania were driving 5+ hours east to get the care they needed in a timely manner. So we've seen up close and personal in Pennsylvania what bans on abortion can look like, and voters were really clear that that was not something they wanted for folks in our state. I think up against this background, it's really not surprising that 37% of Pennsylvania voters rated abortion as their top issue in a CNN exit poll. There was another analysis showing that for half of Pennsylvania voters, the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe had a major impact on which candidates they supported. And that same analysis found that 4 in 10 Pennsylvania voters said the Supreme Court ruling had a major impact on their decision to come out to the polls at all. So we can see the widespread impact both in this sort of early polling data and in the outcomes last Tuesday. What does this mean for abortion access going forward? I think the results of last week's election mean that we can breathe a little easier here in Pennsylvania. We have a governor who will veto any abortion restrictions that cross his desk. And it's possible that, unlike in past years, no abortion restrictions will cross his desk because we may have a pro-abortion rights majority in the state house. And if we do secure that majority, it means that we won't be fighting an anti-abortion constitutional amendment at the ballot box this year, as we had feared. Instead, we can focus on building a vision for abortion access in our state, one that won't just benefit Pennsylvanians, but folks in states where abortion is banned who come here for care. We have a case pending before our state Supreme Court that could restore Medicaid coverage of abortion care in the Commonwealth for the first time since 1985. This lack of insurance coverage is the #1 barrier to access for patients here, and it would be a huge victory and a huge relief for folks to know that if they need it, their insurance will cover abortion care. And also, as Andrea shared, we've already seen a lot of movement at the local level in Pennsylvania to further advance abortion access. We don't have the majorities we need in Harrisburg to enshrine some of these rights and extend access across the state. So localities have really stepped up in the last couple of months to make sure they're doing everything that they can to protect patients. We've seen Pittsburgh, Allentown, and Philadelphia all move to enact protections for patients and providers. And Philadelphia is also now providing funding to support our local abortion fund, which is more than 30 years old and provides incredible support to folks whose insurance doesn't cover the cost of their care, who maybe are uninsured, and increasingly who are traveling long distances to Philadelphia to get the care they need. So we're excited about the potential for moving ourselves toward a vision for abortion access as opposed to just playing defense here in Pennsylvania. And we are hopeful that our elected officials across the state got the message loud and clear last week that Pennsylvanians are standing strong for abortion access. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Andrea.
There we go. Thank you so much, Julie. That is incredibly powerful to think about the direction Pennsylvania can go, knowing its long history and knowing how hard and how long you've all been fighting. So up next, we have Daniel Hamilton, the Director of Public Policy from YWCA in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Daniel, you're up.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say thank you to NRH for giving YWCA Kalamazoo the opportunity to speak about some of the amazing things that we've been a part of here in Michigan. And then also just a big thank you for being allowed to share this space with the incredible work that the other partners are doing across this, the country as well. I can say right off the top, like hearing this will definitely encourage us back here in Michigan to double down on the momentum as we move forward with some of the exciting wins that Michigan took this midterm. So as Andrea said, I work for YWCA Kalamazoo as the Director of Public Policy here. And we have been we're not new to the fight of reproductive justice. Our mission here of fighting to eliminate racism and empower women has always been our beacon, but we also understand that reproductive freedom is very, very critical to a racial justice framework. And so with that kind of guiding us about 2 years ago, really in the start of 2019, we were able to survey our Kalamazoo County residents here to really begin to understand and focus in on the gaps that folks were seeing around access to not only abortion care, but really just comprehensive reproductive health care in general. And this work was, of course, then guided and seeded by our partnership here with NRH, which has led us to really move forward with actually taking action and going on to launch the first of its kind in the country, comprehensive reproductive health care fund, right? And so this fund granted access not only to abortion care, but also things like doula care, pre and postpartum, as well as gender affirming care. So things like hormone changes, name changes, and all the really just the gambit of things that came with gaps that were lifted up in the survey. And so as we begin to kind of go on zeroing out the balance for accessing these types of care, right? So we offer practical support for getting these types of care. So that was childcare, that was access to transportation, that was lodging, that was all types of things that was free to Kalamazoo residents in an effort to further expand access to reproductive health care, including the, access to abortion. And so when the opportunity came along to jump into the movement around Prop 3, which recently passed in the midterm election, how could we not, right? So therefore, you know, like a lot of other folks across the state and definitely across the country, the fight began to be a fight of duality, right? So working with efforts here on the ground locally, but then also becoming a part of the statewide movement to protect the right to abortion here in Michigan. To add to that challenge, just to give a little context, YWCA Kalamazoo also underwent redistricting as well, which had a large impact on how we protected access to reproductive health care and abortion here in Kalamazoo County. We went from 11 districts down to 9, losing 2 seats, which really crippled representation that aligned with issues that YWCA Kalamazoo supported. So we had to, one, also really hone in on voter engagement and voter education, really just to get folks to understand, like, hey, do you know your polling places may have changed, like your districts may have changed, your representatives may have changed, right? All of this that played no small role in understanding what that would mean moving forward for protecting reproductive rights and access to abortion here in the county. And so as we, you know, really begin to align those local movements through our GOTV efforts, there were a lot of things that we did that was, like I said, being able to push that momentum. So we were able to launch a very robust GOTV campaign here on the ground. Like I said, that really engaged in that voter education, that really engaged in that awareness around how redistricting could impact access to reproductive health care here in Kalamazoo County. And then also moving on to do some really strong targeting messaging and voter engagement around Prop 3 once it was moved to the ballot, right, to be voted on this past November. So we were able to do a lot of things that really influenced and added to the statewide support to get this measure passed. And this is really, really important because now that Prop 3 has passed, right, there are strong efforts coming both locally and statewide that we are going to engage in to really make sure that access is continuing to be had and beefed up in Michigan, here in Michigan. So a couple of things that we have been looking at doing is really beginning to hold elected officials accountable here at the county level by really leveraging our relationships with our commissioners. We were very, very fortunate this midterm to really garner the support of 7 of the 9 districts who have aligning support with reproductive justice, right? And so what does that mean? That means the targeted effort that YWCA put into these districts really can begin to be leveraged to hold these winning seats accountable to making sure access to abortion and reproductive health care continues to be protected and had in Kalamazoo County. And then how do we leverage that relationship and that momentum really all the way up to the state level to begin to push aggressive policies in a more consolidated effort along with other state partners to make sure that we're continuing to see some aggressive changes that protect access to reproductive health and abortion. So all in all, this has been a really, really strong advocated effort. I've been saying throughout these past 6-7 months that there has been no small roles here. Everything really went to the push that we needed to see the wins that happen or take place here in Michigan. You heard Andrea speak at the top of the introduction that Michigan now has taken control over both legislators, which hasn't happened for over 4 decades, right? So like, how do we continue to, like I said, double down and build out this momentum with a strong and vocal governor to really make sure we see aggressive policies that continue to not only provide access, but begin to cement the narrative that we can't really begin to have a comprehensive discussion around reproductive justice that does not include the right to access abortion, right? And so how do we can continue to make sure that narrative is being cemented and really written in espoused in equitable and aggressive policies. So I will leave it there and turn it back to Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's so critical to hear how the dots are connected in terms of just the basic fundamentals of making sure people understand what's at stake, how to vote, where to vote, all of that. And then just thinking about that forward momentum and that total shift for all of you. And we're really excited about the prospects for really moving things forward in Michigan. So thank you for laying all that out. Thank you for all the incredible work that you do day in and day out. And speaking of incredible work day in and day out, I'm really excited to now turn it over to California Access RJ's Xochitl Lopez-Ayala.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and much appreciation for being here today. My name is Xochitl Lopez-Ayala, and I'm the Policy Advocacy Coordinator for Access Reproductive Justice, which is California's abortion fund. Abortion funds like Access Reproductive Justice and practical support organizations have long been navigating the difficult terrain of trying to get an abortion. We have decades of wisdom and experience assisting people in paying for costs associated with abortions, including procedural and practical support, transportation to and from their appointments, lodging for overnight stays, support with childcare, as well as other supports. However, the unmet need far exceeds what we are able to support. On November 8th, voters in California have ensured that obtaining an abortion is a constitutional right for all Californians with the passing of Proposition 1. We have made our voices heard that it's our right to choose or refuse contraceptives. While we don't always know what political changes in the future may bring, here in California, we have ensured that our right to abortion and contraceptives are solidified for years to come. We're so proud that our communities have made it clear that in California, we're all invested in making our home a true reproductive freedom state. At Access Reproductive Justice, we're also proud to continue funding abortions and building power to ensure that everyone living here and forced to travel here are fully able to access their right to abortion. We will continue to build our vision of the future where Black, Indigenous, and people of color, LGBTQ+, low income, and young folks across our communities trust themselves, are trusted, and have the social, political, and economic power to sustain their communities and build the families they desire, chosen and biological. We will continue working to remove every barrier, whether they be stigma, financial, or political, and build power in California to achieve true reproductive justice. Thank you to everyone who voted and advocated for a yes on Prop 1 and joining us in this work. I will end with a quote from our Executive Director, Jessica. Access Reproductive Justice has been honored to participate in the California Future of Abortion Council, leading the work to ensure that practical support such as transportation, lodging, childcare, and other emotional and financial support are prioritized, as well as we further strengthen access to abortion in California and prepare for an influx of patients from other states. The policy recommendations made in the Future of Abortion Council report are integral to filling the gaps in abortion access that exist for Californians and those in our sibling states. With that, I will pass it back to you, Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xochitl. You know, I just want to name and lift up what Xochitl and Daniel and Julie all grounded their remarks in so clearly, which is the reality of those who need just and equitable access to reproductive health care, including abortion, and that across the board, those who are most impacted by the attempts to roll back reproductive freedom, and who also turned out in droves in this election, are Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other people of color, and those struggling to make ends meet. I think it's really important that we're always centering that reality in all the work that we're doing, and I'm so grateful to our partners who do that every day. And in that vein, I'd like to introduce our partner, Erin Smith, who helped lead the incredible effort to defeat that hideous ballot measure in Kentucky and has led so many other extraordinary efforts in their community. So Erin, take it away. Erin, you're muted, I think.
That always happens. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you all today and to talk about not just the ballot measure, but Kentucky Health Justice Network as a whole. As you all are aware, we just defeated an amazing ballot measure, which gives us more standing ground to fight to regain abortion access and to fight the injunction in which our Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, has put on abortion access within the state. As a matter of fact, oral arguments began today and this morning. So that is where I have spent most of my time, is just reviewing those oral arguments. But currently the landscape of Kentucky is, as you can imagine, it's extremely difficult. All the calls that we have from people requesting assistance in getting to from their appointments or even help finding appointments is all taking place out of state. So while we are continuing to provide practical support as well as assistance in making appointments, as well as paying for those appointments, we are also burdened with the task of making sure that people are now leaving not just the state, but the entire region. We have been sending people as far as Colorado to receive later term abortions. And as the pressure is mounting here in Kentucky, we are also getting more and more calls for those late term abortions out of just sheer panic and the fear of just not being able to receive that access. But we're weathering the storm, and we're weathering it proudly. We have seen so much support come from not just people across the state, but people from out of the state. Kentuckians who no longer live here. We've gotten support for wonderful organizations and philanthropic orgs just for us to continue that fight. And we are. And we're rising to the occasion. We're meeting the needs of the Commonwealth. As you can imagine, we've also received calls that are not from Kentucky. We've received a lot of out-of-state calls during this time. And it says a lot. It speaks numbers of just how much abortion access is needed, as well as the support for people to just reach those appointments. We are a small staff, but we are a mighty staff. We have risen to the occasion time and time again, and we will continue to do so for as long as it is needed. The ACLU here in Kentucky has put forth wonderful oral arguments for today's opening of those court proceedings, and we are just continuing to support each other as much as we can. Protect Kentucky Access, which was the coalition designed to fight Amendment 2, we are still in contact with each other. We are still communicating with each other. We are still advocating and fighting for one another. And it has been such a wonderful thing to see how quickly we can all assemble and come together from across the state, from across the city, from rural and urban areas to fight for this fight in this fight. And as the results have shown, people in Kentucky want access to abortions. People do not want to be shut out here in Kentucky. And to be quite honest, Kentucky is a state that cannot afford to lose access to safe and healthy abortions. Currently, our numbers are staggering in the areas of the amount of children we have in foster care, the amount of children who age out of foster care, the lack of support that our public school system gets, the lack of support that our teacher gets. We are not equipped to handle the surge of births that would happen if we were to completely lose abortion. And I know that we're not the only state that is realizing that and that is currently seeing that. And because we know that we would not be able to support those individuals and those families, it has opened a lot of people's eyes as to how dire of a situation that we are currently in. We also fight and advocate within KHN to continue to recognize the intersectionality that exists within reproductive justice, reproductive health, and abortion access. That is something that often gets lost in these conversations and in these arguments. And with KHN, I am proud to say that we are an organization that also advocates for trans health. And we are getting hit on both ends through our state legislature from last year and already from what we're hearing this year as well, where we are looking at attacks and not only on reproductive health, but also attacks on trans health and trans rights here in the Commonwealth. And so once again, we are forced to come together and we are forced to make ourselves known and present during these conversations that often take place without us or try to take place without us. We also defeated Amendment 1, which was the ballot measure that was basically giving more power and authority to our state legislature, which is predominantly GOP. We have a supermajority of GOP House and Senate with a Democratic governor. And the design of that amendment was to take away power from the governor so that the supermajority can convene and do what they felt was necessary without notifying the public. So those two amendments were extremely dangerous to each other, and we were fortunate enough to defeat them both this past election day. I will not take up any more of your time. I can go on and on as we continue to stand our ground here at Kentucky, and we just ask that you keep your eye on us. Do not count us out. We are very fierce and often coming from underdog situations to victorious ones at the end. So thank you so much for your time, and I will forward it back to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Really just so remarkable what all of you are doing in Kentucky, and none of us ever give up on Kentucky. Absolutely. So thank you for that. I think we are now at the point I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to take care of facilitating our next phase. And we look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And thank you, everyone, all the amazing panelists. As Andrea mentioned, we're going to open it up for Q&A now. If I could ask all the panelists to turn their video on so reporters can see who to ask questions for. One of our panelists had to hop, but shared their email address if folks want to ask follow-up questions. But to everybody else whose camera is on, be happy to answer your questions. Reporters, if you have a question, please let us know just by typing your name and outlet in the Q&A function, and I can unmute you and call on you so you can ask your question to the panelists. And I think we actually already have a question from Jess. Jess, I just want to clarify, we don't have folks who are actually from Georgia on the call, but Andrea is happy to answer your question more at a high level. But I can allow you to talk if you just want to phrase it for the whole group, since I know not everybody can see the Q&A function.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that you're not specifically addressing Georgia, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts about the upcoming Georgia runoff. We have Herschel Walker, who is opposed to abortion, and the other candidate, Raphael Warnock, supports abortion access. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the stakes at a broad level.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And certainly we have partners in Georgia and we've been in touch with them, although we're letting them really focus where they need to, which is on this runoff. But I think it is true that in every state in some form where this was really front and center. And I think in Georgia, it has been front and center. And I do believe that it will have an impact on that it had an impact on where we are now with this, with the current runoff, with the fact that Walker was behind in the runoff. And I believe it will impact the vote in the upcoming special election. You saw such incredible turnout, particularly among communities of color that are so incredibly supportive of reproductive freedom and understand so intimately the connection between that and what so many of our panelists have spoken so eloquently about today in terms of racial justice and economic justice and their futures and their families and their communities. And I think that that will come forward in this special election. You know, it's an interesting question when you consider that now, because the Democratic Conference has won 50 seats already in the Senate, it may well be that there will be somewhat of a drop off on the GOP side because they sort of, you know, held their nose, to say the least, in a lot of cases, which is what got us to this runoff in the first place. But I don't know how inspired they will be to keep pushing that boulder up the hill in the special election. So we're hopeful that we'll see the kind of outcome in the special election that will give a little more wiggle room in the U.S. Senate, even though obviously the U.S. House is trending the other direction. But the Senate has a lot that it can do in the next couple of years, and that's important. So every vote in that chamber counts.
Thank you very much.
I can just chime in from a state that had another highly contested U.S. Senate race to say a little bit more about how I think the issue played out here. So we had two candidates who were on opposite ends of this issue. John Fetterman supporting abortion rights very strongly, and Dr. Mehmet Oz, who famously said in the sole U.S. Senate debate here that decisions about a pregnancy should be made between a woman, her doctor, and local politicians, which left a lot of us almost laughing if it weren't such a horrifying statement. And as someone who was inundated with millions of dollars worth of ads in the Philadelphia media market for the last month, I think, you know, a lot of those ads tried to make crime the central issue here. And voters were not distracted or deceived by those ads. And I think when it came down to going to the ballot box, there was such a clear contrast between the two candidates on issues of abortion access, which folks understand are also issues of economics and also issues of our criminal legal system, right? I think there's been so much conversation nationally about a rise in crime, and certainly we do see devastating gun violence every day here in Philadelphia. I don't want to downplay that, but I do think the way it was weaponized in this election has really set us back. And I think folks are able to connect those dots, right? In states where abortion is banned, the criminal legal system is being weaponized against pregnant people. The criminal legal system has always been weaponized against low-income folks who are most impacted by abortion bans, against Black and brown folks who are most impacted by abortion bans. And so despite the effort to stir up sort of a false narrative about the need for a law and order response here, folks kept their eye on the ball and turned out strongly for the pro-abortion rights candidate. So I was really proud to see voters come out that way in Pennsylvania, despite, I mean, I can't tell you how overwhelming the advertising here was. You know, I was watching the World Series with my 9-year-old son, and there were images like CCTV footage of people shooting each other on the street that were part of some of these ads here. It was really disgusting, and nonetheless, voters were not fooled.
I would also like to chime in and just say that, because we are an abortion support organization, we pay attention to any and every state, especially down south, that is having a bid election right now. When Georgia having 6 clinics and we couldn't send people to Georgia, that hurt us, because then all of a sudden we have to aim north and northeast. So that definitely changed the trajectory of where we're able to send people or make appointments. It definitely affected how heavily we rely on our southern support and clinic partners. And now we have this huge shift towards everyone's going to Illinois, everyone's going somewhere like in Pennsylvania, someone's going to New Hampshire, New York. And when you are a southern state, there is the culture shock, there is the urban and rural shock. Our patients, not patients, but some of our callers are even calling and saying, hey, can we not go to the northern state because I don't feel comfortable, I feel out of place. And so, yes, heavily watching what's going to happen in Georgia, because we need Georgia back. We need Georgia back desperately. And it's not just Kentucky, it's every clinic from Kentucky, Tennessee, and every surrounding state around Georgia. So we are constantly trying to pay attention to these critical races that have in states that have not just one clinic, but multiple, because those are the states that we need back in our system as long as we are currently fighting in Kentucky. Even getting Ohio back when we did played a huge part in just kind of like a little bit of exhale in where we're able to send our callers. So that was a huge deal for us. And we're hoping to see what happens in Indiana. So with as much of the campaigning and the races and runoff races that are still happening and still being counted, we're watching that very heavily as a support fund, support organization, what that is going to be.
Such excellent points about the ramifications. Any other questions, Emily, that you found? Does anyone else raise their hand?
Looks like we don't have any other questions. We can give folks maybe couple more seconds to pop them in. So last call for questions, reporters, if you have any. Just making sure I'm not missing anything. Looks like none have come in. So I just want to once again thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much to our incredible panelists for being here and for sharing your words and answering that question. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.